All right, Nick Hawks with Deep in State here with Derechlit from Sphere Labs. Thanks for coming on, dude. Super excited to talk through what's going on in your world. Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So you guys recently launched the Helium data credits portal so that people can use Helium by buying data credits. Kind of walk me through what that is and how people can use that.
Yeah, absolutely. So people can go to dc-portal.helium.com, and it's a way for users to be able to use the network. So you can either pay by card, or you can burn your existing HNT, Helium token, and get data credits, which is ultimately what you'll need if you want to use the Helium network for a variety of use cases. Um, and it's really that simple. For the fiat side, there's a provider that we work with, Stripe Crypto. And then for the HNT burn, we handle all that smart contract interaction ourselves. But a good way to think about the product is there's a fiat component, and then ultimately Sphere facilitates those fiat payments and handles the smart contract interaction, as there's a lot of plumbing and things happening behind the scenes to get users their ultimate data credits.
Right. I mean, this used to be the thing you could do within the old, I want to say, whole Helium console or wallet, but it sounds like now this is the kind of new way to do it, and it opens up that you can just use a credit card really easily to buy data credits.
Yep, exactly. In the interest of making it so that a municipality, for example, who doesn't really want to think about crypto, can still access the Helium network.
Okay. Love it. So Helium is the first big one that you guys have done as far as I know about. There's a ton of other DePIN projects out there. The next question we've got, we call it the Hive Mapper question. For those of you watching, if you want to get in a Hive Mapper, use promo code DeepInState for 5% off, or you can just hit the link in the description. But apropos to this conversation, I think you guys tagged him on Twitter when we were talking. Where do you think Sphere might fit in with Hive Mapper or other DePIN projects?
Yeah, we're super excited about being able to generalize our architecture that we've made for Helium to other DePIN projects. So potentially Hive Mapper, a couple of others like Render have recently migrated over to Solana. And in effect, they'll be able to outsource that fiat interaction as well as smart contract interaction, which we're super stoked about because then, their end users don't really need to get into the weeds figuring out what crypto is, what a wallet is necessarily. And so broadly, we see ourselves as a gateway for a lot of these promising DePIN projects. So their users don't, need to get into the weeds of using a third party, and it can all be embedded inside a protocol native application.
Dig it. Now, is this all Solana, or will projects like GeoNet, which is on Polygon, will they be able to use this too? Like, where are you guys going with it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So in the initial stages, the beauty is that the architecture is fairly generalizable across different VMs, although certainly the smart contract stuff is native to Solana. The fiat component is not. And so we should be able to use that same fiat flow for any blockchain. And from there, our goal is to uh, be able to expand to other types of VMs because, in some sense, it's a little bit simpler, at least on the implementation side. For example, EVM chains, you just have to start worrying about things like gas, latency, varying block finalization times. And so maybe to summarize the answer to your question, initially it'll be Solana, but certainly over the medium to long term, very excited about being able to give this sort of product to DePIN projects on other chains too.
Got it. And it sounds like the answer to this is pretty clear, but do you see this as kind of like a short term, hey, we just got to get this thing for adoption? Or do you see Sphere as more of a long term, like critical part of the whole DePIN ecosystem?
Yeah, so in the short term, we'll be able to facilitate these payments and get users onboarded onto these protocols. But in the long term, we're super stoked about some of the uh, outside infrastructure that protocols can use to get insights onto their users, that users can ultimately use to manage their payment interactions with these protocols. Uh, we're very excited about some of these features that we'll be releasing over the next month or two. but it's very much within the vein of, say, a Stripe, a Rapid, an Adyen, a Braintree, where you'll be able to tell on the protocol side how many users do you have, like what are they paying for, where are they coming from, and eventually even things like impression analytics, where are they clicking, what's confusing to them, making it super easy to A/B test and design flows for their users. And on the user end, they'll be able to seamlessly manage what they're paying for, be able to easily reconcile that with their accounting on both ends. And so we're optimistic that in the short term, we'll be able to provide this useful service. But because there's so much data involved, that in the long run, both users and protocols will find immense value from continuing to use Sphere.
Dig it. Dig it. So, I mean, right now it makes it way easier for, let's say, a normal person to use a lot of these blockchains. Do you see a day where companies are going to be comfortable holding utility coins like HNT or Geode or Honey on their balance sheet, or do you think you'll always be needed for this?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I would love to see a world where enterprises, larger companies, are willing to hold tokens, stablecoins on their balance sheets. And we've been in conversations with a couple of US based players who are at that scale. To get there, we're going to need a lot of regulatory clarity, which should hopefully come over the next few years. I think long term, if we're talking about like 5 to 10 years, it's a very real possibility, and in many ways would make the entire process for both end users and these protocols a lot more straightforward, as well as us, the payments facilitator, gateway provider.
Oh, interesting. Do you think you'll work yourself out of a position where you end up being a place where like just a normal Stripe can work?
That's a great question. It's hard to predict over the like 5 to 10 year range, just based on how much the world can change.
Yep.
And certainly, if you have sufficient engineering resources and technical competency, you can build anything that's physically within possibility. That being said, there's a lot of proprietary technology that is specific to blockchain, especially when you're thinking about how tokens interact, how users interact across chains, as well as within these protocols themselves. So, for example, like Helium has the notion of like an OUI, an LNS, and these are things that you wouldn't really get out of the box on a given chain. And so it results in the smart contract interaction being somewhat more complicated than, say, a simple token transfer. And so we're optimistic that there will be players such as ourselves or others who are working within the plumbing behind these protocols, where the proprietary technology will represent a lot of additional work that someone at the scale of like Stripe might not be willing to do. But certainly, if you extend the time frame long enough, 10, 15, 20 years, in a world where tokens become much more commonplace, and the thesis of these things being one of the most widely held class of assets
Yep.
perpetuates, then a lot of different things can happen.
Okay. Let's see. So a lot of folks who are watching this show are either founders, kind of seeing what else is going on in the world, or VCs looking for projects to back, as well as deployers. If someone's watching and they're thinking about using you guys for their project, or they have a problem, what kind of problem would they need to have for you guys to be able to solve it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I would broadly categorize it into two things. The first would be at the fiat interaction, so on and off ramping. If they want to outsource their users being able to pay by card, or they want to allow their users to be able to off ramp their tokens into real money, that is an area where we would be able to help. The second area would be the on chain payments interaction itself. So whether it's in the form of one-off payments or recurring payments, we're particularly proud of the infrastructure that we've built around that, because the way that it's done on-chain is non-obvious. And there are all sorts of guardrails, data visualization tools, and analytics that these projects would otherwise have to build out themselves. And it's kind of how we ended up at Sphere. We were trying to make our own software, and the toughest part wasn't making cool stuff. It was making money off of it. And realizing that traditional payment platforms don't support this natively, as well as the fact that the way that this data is gathered from chain is quite different from how normally it's done. Normally, you just query a database, it gives it to you right there. On chain, you have to parse through transactions. You have to worry about threads getting orphaned. You have to think about how to label various types of data. And so whether it's on the fiat side or whether it's more on the on-chain side, that's where we could add the most value for potential projects that are looking to build in this vertical.
Okay. And you talked a little bit about kind of, it sounded like UX stuff, like tracking where people are spending money and what they're doing. Is that something that you guys also have a competency in? Or is it mostly like, hey, we're just the bridge to fiat is kind of the layman's way of looking at it?
Yeah, that's a great question. In many ways, I think that we are more of the former than the latter. We can certainly help out on the fiat interaction side, and particularly within payments reconciliation, when you're thinking about different types, whether it's from the fiat world or from the blockchain native world. But we care deeply about user experience. Uh, Users don't want to think about a lot of the uh, details when it comes to how chain or blockchains work, how transactions work, and how payment transfers work. So a good example would be, let's say you make a transaction and an NFT, for example, is sent from one wallet to another. How do you like accurately determine if this is a transfer, if this is a sale, and ultimately, how do you easily describe what is occurring in your accounting software? Our goal is to make it so that developers, builders, companies don't have to worry about this stuff the same way that we did, and can instead just focus on what their core competencies are, building out products that customers ultimately want, while we handle some of this more operational annoyance behind the scenes.
All right, that makes sense. I mean, it sounds this is kind of a funny way to say it, but it sounds like all the boring shit that has to happen is what you guys do on the payment side. What are some things that you guys are super pumped on over the next, let's say, 3 months to a year, as far as what Sphere is going to be able to do with new projects?
Yeah, so there's a lot happening behind the scenes when it comes to cross-chain interaction that we'll be releasing over the next few months. We have some novel approaches that we think will really improve the user experience when, say, someone with a MetaMask is trying to interact with a Solana contract or Phantom with an EVM contract. In the short term, though, we're planning on staggering our core platforms release. And so super stoked to get people's eyes on it. We've been working closely with a couple of our early clients. So, the Latitudes, the Monsters, the Heliuses of the world, and have really tried to get granular about the user experience and what information users ultimately care about. But we've been hacking away on this for several months now, and there should be a lot of features that in some ways are missing, and in other ways we feel like compared to what currently exists in the market could be drastically improved. And so during the summer and leading into the fall, I think that's what we're the most excited by. And then certainly, as we look into later this year and into next year, there are some very cool things, as I mentioned previously, regarding that cross-chain user experience that I'll wait to tell everyone about.
Okay. So as we kind of wrap this thing up, is there anything that folks should look for in the next 3 months that will be a sign that, like, hey, you guys are really making progress? Like, what do you expect to be able to release or have folks
Yeah,
kind of see in public?
yeah. So we'll be making an announcement for when we move from closed private beta to more of an open private beta, and then eventually to a public release. And it'll coincide with some cool news on Twitter. So as long as you follow our Twitter account, it's at sphere_labs. You should be able to tell when things are ready for you to use. And this should coincide, as I mentioned just now, with some other exciting news. And so, as long as you're following the account, you shouldn't be able to miss it.
Okay. Love it. We'll have to have you back on when you guys announce it so we get some clarity on it and understand what's going on. But Derechlit, thanks so much for coming on and explaining what's going on with Sphere. Rock and roll, and looking forward to seeing you next time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks so much for hosting. I really appreciate the opportunity to get to speak about what we've been cooking. And yeah, I definitely want to come back and update you guys with what we've been up to.
Right on.